First, I emphasize the upper border of this feather in the form of a streamlined elastic line. I indent a small distance. I leave a narrow white strip for the light axis of this feather. Next, I emphasize the outer outline of the white feather closest to us, closest to this detail. Here, I will show a dark recess and wash a dark feather up to the neighboring object. One of them has already appeared. Now the next feather. Along the outer border on the left side, I leave a light, almost white axis. The mortar dries very quickly and I add water to it if necessary. Here I leave a thin white strip. I fill the entire surface of this feather up to the outline of the white feathers with an active and dense blue color. The outer border on the bottom right side is also very clear, precise, and streamlined. For the next feather, I do the same thing. I leave a very narrow, thin white strip. I feel the outer border on the left side and do a thorough, tight wash for the next pattern in this group. If the mix runs dry, we add a touch of ultramarine a little at a time. If necessary, we can darken some elements here additionally. Again, we leave a white strip, a thin line. The rest of the pen, from outline to outline thin, fill boldly blue color. We are not afraid to darken the image here, because these details themselves are quite active in tone. They all turn out to be of different thickness. This is not an ornament of repeating patterns. This is not a striped fence. Here we work very carefully on the corner of the shape. There is one more element that remains unscripted here. To make it successful, first I will carefully feel its boundary in the form of a narrow strip on the left side. I will trim this line if necessary so that it does not turn out loose. Next, I will leave a light strip as the center axis of the feather. Then I'll cover the rest of its surface with a blue color. On all the feathers, this blue color is not quite uniform. Somewhere it is a little lighter, somewhere a little denser in tone. That's good. Next, I'll bring in a shade called Payne's gray, this kind of dark, dense, almost black shade. Somewhere along the center axis in this way, I'll make dense, almost black underlines. This will diversify the fragment. In addition to blue, another shade will appear here. In general, the group will become denser in tone due to this action. It is not necessary to recolor literally all the details. Just some areas should be darkened in this way. Let's leave these feathers to dry for a while. In the meantime, let's work on the light elements. I'm going to use a slightly larger brush to prepare the blend. I'm going to use a #3 brush. I'm going to put ultramarine back on the palette. I'm going to do a liquid mix because the shades are going to be light. Next, I'm going to put in the pink quinacridone. I mix the translucent mix with the ultramarine. I get this pale mauve shade. I pour this shade right through this group of light feathers from outline to outline. Do not go beyond the outer borders. On the right side, the shade becomes a little more bluish. So this is where I boldly introduce the open ultramarine. I made it semi-transparent. These feathers, the outlines of which we so carefully worked outline at the stage of formation of the form with a simple pencil, I fill so that this shade is very light, pale, and airy. Next, I'm going to introduce more pink quinacridone, because the center part of this detail block is actually almost pink. It should be a distinctly pink color with a little bit of ultramarine. I wash from outline to outline so that there are no sharp transitions. We can play with color and introduce pink quinacridone in pure form for the central part of this block. I'm going to fill this area with pink quinacridone. Here, about the clear outer edge on the right side, cannot care much yet, because dark spots will appear on the right side. All inaccuracies here can still be overlapped and concretized. Now we can reintroduce ultramarine in the open again. Such a pure, transparent, very light shade will allow me to delicately draw the lower part of the light feathers in their general block. The soft shimmers of pinks and blues create a beautiful coloristic moment in the illustration. Before these areas dry, I can immediately introduce some purple on the palette. I'll lightly touch this hollow area and immediately move it into a denser shadow. The stain spreads out in different directions. I will not specify any outlines now. Under the block of feathers, I will also go through with this shade. It is important not to oversaturate, not to make this color too dense. It is also very pale, completely transparent. Also, this shade under the horizontally directed feather in the depression is present here too. We'll leave this block like this for now. Let's work on another area. I'm introducing purple color in its purest form now. I'm adding more water and making it liquid. With this violet color, I'm going to work on the whole neck without stepping on the red part. That's where I'm working. The shade is probably a little dark. Right on the paper, I add a little more water. I pick up the excess pigment and redistribute it downwards. You can also add literally 1 drop of ochre here to make the shade more complex, more earthy. Here, this brownish note is present. I'm going to bring it in. Now I'm going to take a little bit more ochre. It will prevail in the mix. This brownish color with a slight note of purple will allow me to set the basis for the future very light, long feathers on the dark torso. In my case, it's going to be a ruby shade. That's what it's called in my kit. I'm going to give it a juicy blend. Starting from the central part of the wing, I bring this shade to the feathers. Here, it is necessary to pay quite close attention to the contour borders of light feathers, taking into account their arc shape. Here, the line should be clear, streamlined, extremely specific, and visually clear. This place we fill with a red shade. I'll add a little more water to the mix to make it easier to redistribute this shade to the right. I form here a rather large, very juicy spot, almost to the bottom base of this group of parts. This is where I'm taking it out. The stain is there. I wash the brush, dry it a little bit, and smooth out the too sharp border. The less sharp borders in the base wash, the better, because sharp borders in the first layers of watercolor create an unpleasant cutting effect. We've done the blending. Now we introduce pink quinacridone on the palette. The mix of pink quinacridone will be less saturated. It's weaker, it has a little more water in it. With this pinkish, translucent, and cooler shade, I draw the lower fragment. Details will dissolve. Now I use a mix of purple with a touch of Payne's gray. We keep going around, revolving around 3 basic shades. It's ultramarine, purple, and Payne's gray. Next, I'm going to do the textured ripping on the back. Here you need very thin and dark arched jerky strokes. The feathers have already broken into groups. There is an alternation of dark and light elements. As the dark strokes appear, the fragment begins to gradually darken. Some intervals I need to thicken further to take away in tone. This is especially true for this group of objects. Now I will take one dark line as a basis. I will make it even denser and longer in tone. Underneath it is a light line. This light line I will now split into 2. Underneath them, I'll pass another darker line. In other words, I leave only the individual light stripes uncovered with a dense shade. In this part, I'll draw a thicker, wider line. It is clear that your feathers may differ in pattern. Similar fluffing, loosening of the texture, I want to make a pale, barely saturated lilac shade on the upper part of the wing, on its light feathers. Here they are very large. I need to break them up a little bit into smaller parts. Only the lines here are perfectly fine, very unobtrusive. If you make them too dense in tone, the fragment will be overloaded. In other words, you should do this only if these feathers are too big, and because of this, they seem unconvincing. Multiple touches. The texture becomes more complex, the number of feathers increases. Very actively, this will not affect the overall aesthetics of the image. It's just a slight delicate addition to help achieve a little more naturalism to get one step closer. At the very end, I'll do an inscription with the name of the bird. This is the end of the illustration.